What is going on, everybody? Back here with the Inside MMA podcast. Jake Fine. Haven't done a full podcast since the September pay-per-view, but um, we've been really busy on TikTok. We've been really trying to grow the TikTok and really just focusing on that. We've been doing a lot of cool content exclusively for TikTok, and we're making our comeback back to the podcast and the YouTube stuff now. We've just kind of been busy, so kind of taken our resources and focused them on our biggest source of viewership, which has been TikTok. But today I want to get into kind of the storylines for the upcoming weeks of the UFC. So tonight we've got the fight night. Not tonight. Tonight we've got the UFC fight night with Costa versus Vittori. So Paulo Costa and Marvin Vittori were supposed to fight at 185. Now, this one is pretty interesting just because they both have fought Israel Adesanya and lost. And obviously both of them would love to fight for a title. And whoever loses this fight, you would presume, is going to have a harder time getting back to that title contention. But whoever wins this fight is probably a pretty good candidate for the next guy who's going to be in line to fight Izzy, who's been obviously the top dog there. So there's kind of that storyline there that makes this fight very compelling. These two guys fighting off against each other. And, Paulo Costa, MMA Junkie, put out this article, and I'm going to kind of skim through it to give you guys kind of the details. But essentially, they were supposed to fight at 155, but Paulo Costa is kind of pulling a Nate Diaz here where, right on the fight week, he essentially says, I'm not going to make weight. Can we get a catch weight? He said he was 211 pounds, and he declared that there was going to be no way he'd be making his contracted weight for the 185-pound fight against Marvin Vittori. So essentially, if they do a catch weight, the deal there is you forfeit 20% of your purse. So it kind of throws off the whole plan, just that alone, right? It kind of throws off the whole plan. It kind of delegitimizes the fight for both fighters, and I would be pretty pissed if I was Marvin Vittori here. Just because he's obviously pulling his weight and he's making the right cuts and stuff, and then you have this other asshole who's not fucking making weight. And there's a theory going on that Paulo Costa is There's a theory going on here that Paulo Costa is doing all this just to fuck with the UFC because he had beef with Dana back when Jake Paul was, making all his headlines and making all this money. He had beef with Dana saying, why am I only making $350,000 when this bum over here, Jake Paul, is boxing scrubs and making millions of dollars? And Dana was basically like, your last performance sucked ass. So why the fuck are you talking to me about money? And so people kind of think Paulo Costa is doing all this just to fuck with the UFC and kind of delegitimize the storylines they have going on and all the different shit that they have going on. And he's trying to get out of he's trying to aggravate. The theory is he's trying to aggravate them so he can be released from his contract so he can go make more money elsewhere, which if that's the case, can't really blame him. But after that happened, Paulo Costa said he can't even make the 195-pound catch weight for the bout either. So basically, they had to grant him another 10 pounds, putting them at 205. So the fight went from 185 to 195 to 205. And it just seems like he's, fucking with the UFC. Everybody kind of knows he infamously blamed being drunk on his fight against Izzy, and which resulted in his loss, and he's blaming all that. He said he couldn't fall asleep, so he drank wine to help him fall asleep, but when he woke up and did the fight, he was still drunk, so that's why he lost. Which either way you look at it, you just look like a fucking fool, because why are you a pro athlete drinking before a fight where your head's getting punched? Doesn't make sense. What pro athlete does that? Could you imagine a fucking Mike Trout or LeBron James drinking before, like the night before their game 7, um, or like a key game in their career. Like, why the fuck would they do that? Um, but Paulo Costa did that, and then he was trying to use that to like make his loss look more acceptable. But I think it just kind of backfired. And instead of taking the loss like a man and learning from it humbly, he tried to make all these excuses. And now he's mad about his money situation, which I can't blame a man for trying to make a better living for himself. But it just looks very egotistical, and he doesn't look like he's taking it seriously and taking the title too seriously like his counterparts in the UFC. So it just kind of delegitimizes all of the shit he has going on. But nonetheless, I'm excited to see this fight, and I'm gonna watch it tomorrow. Paulo Costa was on a 9-fight win streak before he lost to Izzy. 10-fight win streak when he lost to Izzy. He kind of needs to win this fight, especially like if he needs a win basically if he wants to like put himself back in like the conversation with the top guys, because I think his reputation was so damaged after the loss to Izzy, and then he made all these excuses, and he pulled kind of a what's his face? He pulled a Deontay Wilder, where after Deontay Wilder's last fight, he had all these excuses for why he lost. Instead of just taking the loss like a man and saying he was going to get better, he like had all these different excuses. So Paulo Costa did the same thing, but in the UFC, and it was pathetic. So I think he needs this win. Marvin Vettori is trying to be the first Italian UFC champion, and he has to win this fight as well. These guys actually both, in their last fights, respectively, have both lost to Israel Adesanya. Marvin, that was his second time losing to Izzy in his last fight. He lost to him on UFC he lost to him earlier in 2018, but basically they both need to win this fight. It's a must-win for both of them. And if either one of them, whoever loses, is going to be set back in a major way. So this is definitely a very compelling fight. I'm not predicting the fight. I'm not a fight expert, so I'm not predicting these fights, but I find the storyline very compelling. And personally, I'm rooting for Marvin Vettori just because I just don't like the type of guy Paulo Costa kind of is or how he acts. Let's talk about Islam Makhachev versus Dan Hooker. Islam Makhachev, he's kind of famous for Khabib taking him under his wing, and they have very similar styles, though there are a few key differences. Islam has had a few more stand-up moments in his career where Khabib is pretty much always like, exactly what he's going to do. He's going to take you to the ground. He's going to maul your ass like a bear, and you're just going to have to figure out how to deal with it, and hopefully you don't get tapped. That was basically Khabib's career. Makhachev is not that dominant. He's not as dominant on the ground as Khabib was, but he still has a very similar style. It's very ground-heavy style, very ground and pound oriented. And he's been looking for fights against these top-ranked guys at lightweight. Bring in Dan Hooker. Dan Hooker is hot right now. He's become like a fan favorite because of his most recent fight against Nasrat Haqparast. I don't know how to say it, but he was on the Ortega card. So Dan was basically coming off a couple of losses, most notably to Michael Chandler most recently, and then before that Dustin Poirier. So he lost to like two of the top lightweights in the world back to back, but losses in the UFC can set you back pretty quickly in terms of title contention. So it seemed like Dan really needed a win, and he got one. Now, that was a impressive win because of the context. So the context, obviously he needed the win. Otherwise, that would be 3 losses in a row, which, when that happens, it's not good for you in your UFC career. But also, he was coming from Australia, New Zealand, and those places are locked down to shit. You can't go to gyms. None of those guys from over there can fight. In fact, the guys from his camp, um, I believe it's in Australia. I'm pretty sure. Like, there's a ton of UFC guys there, and they're all moving to the States because of the severity of the lockdown in Australia. So, knowing that context and that he couldn't really train like normal and he still came in and got a win in the UFC made gave the fans more of a reason to appreciate him and kind of put him back in the spotlight. And now he's taking kind of a short notice fight against Islam Makhachev, who is apparently the guy that nobody wants to fight. Islam's been complaining time and time again that none of these top guys want to fight him. And Dan Hooker is breaking that stigma. So here's the thing about this fight. Islam is this up-and-coming guy, right? Islam is this soon, like, if Khabib is Michael Jordan, Islam is kind of got that Kobe Bryant vibe where it's like you're coming in, you're trying to fill the shoes of the lightweight GOAT, right? And you're complaining that no one wants to fight you because you're so fucking good. Well, now Dan Hooker, who's really good, says he'll fight you. He's kind of that ranked guy that you've been looking for. So it's basically no excuses after this. Here's my opinion on this fight. Islam needs a win. If he loses this fight, it kind of delegitimizes his whole brand of being the up-and-coming young stud that nobody wants to fight. Dan Hooker, I'm not sure he needs a win just because he already won a fight recently. He's coming on short notice to replace a guy. And, like, the people aren't going to dislike him, and he's not going to delegitimize himself if he loses this fight, in my opinion. If he does win, it makes him look that much better, though. So I know they both want to win. But it makes for a really compelling fight just because both of these guys could use a boost. Islam, if he wins this fight, they're gonna put him a lot farther up in the rankings, and that's for sure. Let's check out like the guys Islam's beat. He's beat pretty handedly. He's got one loss in his record, and that was in the UFC. But his last two fights are a win against Drew Dober and a win against Thiago Moises. And then it'll be interesting to see what he can do against Dan Hooker. Dan Hooker's like a super long guy and obviously very good. And he's just one of those top guys. So this will be a real test because if Islam loses to this guy, it sets him back quite a bit. It definitely takes him out of that Khabib conversation because how can you compare yourself to Khabib, who was undefeated and beat guys like Conor McGregor and Dustin Poirier, Justin Gaethje? How can you compare yourself to that guy if you can't even beat Dan Hooker, who's not on the same level as those guys? Dan Hooker's a nice guy to beat, to get you to fight those guys, to get you in the conversation with the top 5 guys in the lightweight division. He's like the next step towards that, but he's not that. So if you lose to that guy, it sets you back quite a bit. It definitely ruins the momentum, and it cuts your workout ahead of you. Dan Hooker, if he does win, he's that guy who sent that guy back where he belongs. He's that guy who beat the guy that nobody wanted to fight, if you catch my drift. So this is important for both these guys. And I'm not sure who's going to win. I just know that it's really engaging just because of that storyline in general. I think if Islam does win, right now he is the... Islam's ranked 5 as it is, and Dan Hooker's ranked 6th. Well, shit. I guess so the guys ranked above Islam is number 4 Michael Chandler, number 3 Beneil Dariush, number 2 Justin Gaethje, number 1 Dustin Poirier, and then the champion Charles Oliveira. So if Islam wins, do you feed him to the loser of Gaethje versus Chandler? Do you feed him to Beneil? Do you give him a title shot? I don't think you give him a title shot just because he's got to beat. I think he's got to beat one of the guys above him. But if you beat Dan Hooker and some crazy shit happens, you might end up in a title shot sooner than you think, like we saw with Michael Chandler or Charles Oliver. Like if you keep beating these, if you beat that top guy, the top 7 guy, and a lot of crazy things can happen, as we've seen in the UFC plenty times, where Islam ends up getting a title shot way sooner than we all thought. I still think he's like a year out from a title shot. Yeah, because you're going to give Justin Gaethje or Michael Chandler, whoever wins that fight, you're going to give them the title shot after Poirier versus Oliveira. But you could get, I think Islam faces Beneil next, and then the winner of that might get a title shot in a different time. That's what I would guess happens next. Dan Hooker, if he wins, you have to put him back top 5, which would be pretty remarkable for Dan because he was number 6 when he lost to Michael Chandler. So for him to still be in that conversation, for him to be put back in the top 5 after that, and after all the shit he's gone through, that's very impressive and good for him because you can really build off that momentum. He hasn't seemed like one of those title contention guys to me since I've been paying attention to him. But you can't really ignore him if he beats the top 5 guy, especially given the context of Islam being the guy that nobody wants to fight, right? Dustin Poirier can be quoted saying that the guy to fear, the up-and-comer to fear is Islam Makhachev because he's so similar to Khabib, and he trained with Khabib, and he's got all the same attributes as Khabib. That's the guy that you don't want to fight. So Dan Hooker steps up on short notice to replace Islam's opponent. Big deal. I say if Islam wins, give him Beneil, and that puts him in, if he wins that, it puts him in title contention. If Dan Hooker wins, different story. Give him probably the loser of Gaethje versus Chandler. It would be cool to see Dan Hooker face Chandler again, but I want to see Chandler win the title. So, I don't know. Moving on, Peter Yan versus Corey Sandhagen. That's a fucking fun fight. So, the interim bantamweight champion. The interim bantamweight title fight. Corey Sandhagen coming in for Aljamain Sterling after Aljo pulled out of his fight due to some recovery issues he was having. And yes, I know all of the context to that. You don't need to blow me up in the comments. The Sandman is coming off a loss. So in his last 4 fights, he's fought 2-2, right? He's fought 4 of the top guys in that division. He lost to Aljo, then he beat Marlon Moraes, then he beat Frankie Edgar, then he lost to TJ Dillashaw in a controversial loss. I had Corey winning that fight, but the record says he loses. So TJ probably would have gotten this interim title shot against Peter Yan, but he's injured. He had a knee surgery, so he's out. Which brings in, I guess the next guy would be Corey Sandhagen, right? So Corey Sandhagen, I'm not sure how excited I am for this fight. He is the next guy in line after TJ Dillashaw. I would have to guess that you don't want to see Corey Sandhagen lose. I like Corey Sandhagen. I was sad to see that he lost the fight against TJ. Because like I said, I thought he won. I know he's got all this momentum behind him. He's definitely a star in that division. And he's fun to watch. He's a fun fighter to watch fight. He's a great striker. Those guys are always entertaining as hell. Just the guys who can really strike. But you don't want to see Aljo come back and fight Corey Sandhagen for the belt with all the context of what's already happened. You want to see him come back and beat Peter Yan. It's going to be hard to convince the fans of the UFC that Aljo is the true champion if he doesn't come back and avenge his title against Peter Yan, who he has all that drama with. But you don't want to see Corey Sandhagen lose. So here's my thing, right? I would guess that if Corey Sandhagen does lose, that he's not necessarily out of contention. Because he's still the number 3 guy behind Peter Yan and TJ Dillashaw. If Peter Yan, I think they only really they don't really stand to lose much in this fight because it's an interim title fight. So if either one of them lose, it's not like they're not close to a title shot again. They're both still probably a win away from a title shot. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens because just given all the context, who does Aljo come back and face? Does Corey, if he does win and he beats Aljo, what happens to the Aljo and Peter Yan rematch? If Peter does win, who does Corey have to beat to get back into that title shot? It'll be I feel like a year ago, when you looked at all the divisions, the most compelling was definitely lightweight, right? It just was the most stacked. But I feel like after a year, you look at all the divisions, it just feels like they're not so uneven now. Lightweight definitely looks really compelling. But bantamweight, I would say right now, is a little more exciting than lightweight just because of all the drama that's going on with the bantamweight title. Alexander Volkanovski, I mean, he's just had one of the most exciting fights of the year, and he still has a rematch probably coming up against Max Holloway after Max faces Yair. So that's really exciting. Colby versus Kamaru is really exciting. And then that goes to the main event of UFC 267, which is Blachowicz versus Glover Teixeira. I don't know how you say his last name. Teixeira, whatever. I mean, right now you get to see if Yan is going to go on a run with his title and really cement himself as one of those top guys, or is he going to, what's going to happen there? You don't know. So it'll be fun to see. I feel like the most exciting fight for this night is definitely Yan versus Sandhagen, but it'll be interesting to see Peter Yan versus Corey Sandhagen, but it'll be interesting to see, we're seeing Jan Blachowicz really have a title defense now. It'll be interesting to see what happens. What does he do with the title? Does he go on a run? Does he really milk the benefits of that title by going on a run and making a bunch of money and earning a bunch of pay-per-view points? It's fun to see how these cards get announced. Like there's one key fight on the card, and then over the next 6 or 7 months leading up to that card, you see all these different fights get added to the main event, and it just blossoms into these great cards. That really happened with the September card, the Volkanovski versus Ortega card. Nick Diaz got added to that one. And Merab's fight ended up being great. Dan Hooker's fight ended up being great. These cards, they might not look super compelling. They might not have superstars on them, but they just keep ending up being so compelling. And I feel like this October 30th card, after Aljo got taken off of it, it seemed like kind of a bummer. But right now, this card's looking like it's going to shape up to be like a very fun night. And you got to give credit to Dana for that. And these guys the matchmakers who set these things up, I mean, they don't really, the, I guess that's one of the benefits of having more fighters is you have like more competition. There's more options and you can put together more of these entertaining fights. And I haven't even talked about Khamzat Chimaev. I mean, everybody kind of knows the situation. He's coming back um, after this like crazy hot come up and then kind of flatlined due to his illness. He got COVID and couldn't train for a while, and he's finally coming back. So hats off to him. I'm excited for these upcoming cards. I'm excited to see what happens tomorrow night with Fight Night. I'm excited to see what happens on this pay-per-view the following week. And then the week after that, you've got the Chandler fight. So these storylines are super compelling. And yeah, super excited. So I'm going to end the podcast there. Thank you guys for watching or listening or viewing the clips. We appreciate it. And looking forward to talking about these fights after the fact. So see you guys in the next one. Peace.